The very first publications of the Smithsonian, or the earliest books on North American antiquities, described and illustrated things that would surprise most of us today.
Some people, such as Caleb Atwater and Squire and Davis, they believe the artifacts that they were finding around these mounds and cities and earthen structures, that this was representative of an advanced civilization. This is the very first publication of the Smithsonian Institution. This is the work that Squire and Davis were able to complete in the late 1830s to the early 1840s in what's called the Ohio Territory, which primarily worked in the state of Ohio, showing the monuments and the vast cities and the greatness that they must have had.
Some of the sites that they surveyed and the maps that they made, as our only knowledge of these sites even existed now, because they were destroyed or they were intruded upon and their original configurations were greatly altered.
The real question is, why were these sites not preserved? And why are these advanced civilizations not more commonly known of today? The answers can be found in two surprising places. First, in the 19th century implementation of the doctrine of manifest destiny, and second, in the then emerging conflict between evolutionary science and religion.
The three things that really kind of make up manifest destiny, this idea of American exceptionalism. Another idea encapsulated or included in manifest destiny is the ideal that not only are we unique and our institutions are unique, but we have a unique mission to spread that and to take that across the continent. And then the third area is that we are uniquely qualified or called. It is our destiny.
This idea of the different races not only having separate creations, but perhaps they also had different capabilities. That's where that played into it, because it's a small step from there to start talking about allegedly superior or inferior races, and that's exactly what happened.
Science did tell them that there were certain races that were superior and some that were inferior.
There seem to be two traditions in our culture with respect to acknowledging the accomplishments of our predecessors. The first is manifest destiny flowing westward out of New England and New York and Philadelphia. From Plymouth Rock onward, we are fated to progress across the continent, driving the savages before us, and we are going to redeem this place from barbarism.
This classic study on manifest destiny and then Roger Kennedy's application of it to understanding and accepting American antiquities just is a very obvious pattern.
The obvious pattern was that discoveries of antiquities conflicted with the thinking of European immigrants, that Native Americans and their ancient ancestors were mere savages.
The doctrine of manifest destiny allowed the United States government to classify the Native Americans as savages by their terminology, and by calling them savages, that would allow them to push them aside and basically claim their lands as America expanded in a westward direction.
19th century Americans would have found it more than inconvenient. Politically, it would have been impossible for them to have taken lands away from Indians, from any indigenous peoples, if they viewed them as having rights even close to what they had as American citizens.
As the archaeology developed as a new science and anthropology as a new science, And they would find these things, these evidences to show that there was a written language, that these people possibly did smelt iron, they did smelt copper, and they mined it, they carried it, trade over great distances. These were signs of a higher civilization. And that higher civilization idea or theory coming from our educated scientific community of the day became directly in conflict with the manifest destiny ideas put forth by the U.S. government.
Well, it's not surprising to me that Native people in this area at this time were working copper and had extensive knowledge of copper. As an Anishinaabe person who's from Michigan, I can tell you how critical and central copper is to our way of life, even today. With it being so central, of course, we had to be very skilled at mining it and having it be getting resources and sharing those resources and spreading them around. You know, it's not, for me, when I think about it as an archaeologist, it's not just the implements and the level of technology. It's the wider network that would have had to be developed to make that happen. You know, where the copper was coming from, how far away that was, and what I find students are always really surprised by is the extent of those kind of trade networks that we don't see again in this country until much later.
There was every pressure to see the Indians as intellectually inferior and primitive, and a whole set of policies that would keep them from showing that they were as intelligent and could do as well on their own if they had access to capital, if they weren't excluded from the opportunities of other Americans.
I relate to it very strongly as a Native person. It's this constant idea that Native people's ways of knowing and doing things, it can't possibly have been good. It can't possibly have been as good as these other ways of knowing or these other technologies.